There's a question a lot of people quietly carry around in their heads, even if they've never said it out loud. Is there something you can say, just a few words, that instantly makes you impossible to manipulate? Something that shuts down mind games before they even start. Something that protects your power without turning you into a cold or aggressive person. And the answer is yes, there is. But it's probably not what you think. This isn't about having the perfect comeback or winning arguments. It's not about dominating conversations or proving someone wrong. This is about how language quietly shapes power in real time, and how a single shift in how you respond can make manipulation fall flat. Especially when you're dealing with narcissistic personalities, controlling bosses, emotionally draining family members, or anyone who tends to push, guilt, or corner you in conversation. Most people don't realize how vulnerable they become simply by the way they speak. Not because they're weak, but because they're empathetic. They care. They want to be understood. They want things to stay calm. And manipulators rely on that. Before we go any further, it helps to get clear on what manipulation actually is. Manipulation is a form of social influence that's dishonest at its core. It's influence used at someone else's expense to serve a hidden agenda. In conversation, it rarely shows up as obvious lies or cartoonish villain behavior. More often, it's subtle. It's phrasing, it's tone, it's implication. It's pressure disguised as concern, curiosity, or confusion. And the people most likely to manipulate you aren't strangers. They're often the ones with the most emotional access to you. Family members, romantic partners, close friends, authority figures, people who already have your trust. They know your fears, your values, your soft spots. That knowledge gives them leverage, especially in dialogue. When narcissistic personalities are involved, this becomes even more pronounced. Narcissists don't just bend the truth, they reshape reality when it benefits them. They distort, minimize, exaggerate, and reframe, all to gain something at your expense. And they are highly skilled at using language as a weapon. The way they ask questions, the way they pause, the way they frame situations so that no matter how you answer, you're already on the defensive. What they're ultimately after is supply, your attention, your emotional energy, your reactions, your time. Praise, reassurance, sympathy, control. All of it feeds their ego. And they don't get it by accident. They get it by pressing on deeply rooted psychological triggers that most people don't even realize are being activated. These triggers didn't come out of nowhere. Humans evolved to stay connected to the group because exclusion once meant danger, survival. So we develop strong social fears. Fear of rejection, fear of disapproval, fear of being seen as selfish, cold, or difficult. These fears are closely tied to empathy, to caring about how we affect others. Here's the problem. Narcissists don't avoid those fears. They exploit them. In conversation, they tend to push on 4 main pressure points. Guilt, which taps into our aversion to causing harm. Fear, which targets our desire to avoid loss or failure. Disapproval, which activates our need to be accepted. And control, which plays on our discomfort with uncertainty or chaos. When those buttons are pushed, most people react automatically. They explain, they soften, they defend. And that reaction is exactly what keeps the manipulation alive. Becoming unmanipulatable doesn't mean losing your empathy. It means learning not to let your empathy be used against you. This is where boundaries come in, and this is where most people get it wrong. When people hear the word boundaries, they think about rules for other people, what someone else is allowed or not allowed to say or do. But conversational boundaries don't work that way. You don't hold them by controlling others. You hold them by controlling your response. In conversation, boundaries are incredibly simple, but they're not easy. Some responses function like dead ends. Others function like on-ramps. A dead end is a response that clearly signals the conversation stops here. It doesn't explain, it doesn't justify, it doesn't apologize. It's calm, neutral, and final. There's nowhere else for the other person to go. An on-ramp, on the other hand, is what most people instinctively build when they feel uncomfortable holding that line. They add softeners. I'm sorry. I just think. I might be wrong. I hope that's okay. It sounds polite, and it often is well-intentioned, but what it really does is reopen access. It communicates hesitation, uncertainty, guilt. It tells the other person that the boundary isn't solid, and narcissists are extremely attuned to that. They listen for cracks. They listen for emotional movement. Because hesitation tells them you're still usable, that you can still be pushed, persuaded, or pressured. This isn't accidental. It's a test, and they're hoping you fail it. Think about how dead ends work in real life. When you're driving and you see a dead end sign, you don't take it personally. You don't argue with the road. You don't assume it's being rude. You accept that there's no way through, and you turn around. Reasonable people do this instinctively. They adjust. They move on. Narcissists don't. When they hit a boundary, they escalate. They question your tone. They act confused. They accuse you of being cold, selfish, or unreasonable. They push emotionally because that's the only tool they have left. And that moment, when you hold the line and they escalate, is when the mask slips. That's when you see exactly who you're dealing with. One of the most common mistakes people make in conversation is offering an on-ramp while secretly hoping the other person will choose not to take it. They over-explain. They soften. They try to make their no easier to accept. Not because they're weak, but because they're still hoping the other person will be reasonable. But over-explaining doesn't reinforce a boundary. It creates access. Every extra word gives a manipulator more information, more angles, more places to push. Instead of closing the interaction, you're signaling that the conversation is still open to negotiation. And for someone who thrives on control, that's an invitation. This is why your boundary can't depend on someone else understanding you, respecting you, or backing off. Your boundary lives entirely in how you respond. I see this constantly with people who are learning this skill. Someone will ask a loaded or polarizing question about politics, religion, family drama, whatever happens to be emotionally charged that week. And they'll say something like, "I don't want to cross your boundaries." And the truth is, no one can cross your boundaries unless you let them. Boundaries aren't enforced by controlling what others say. They're enforced by deciding what you engage with, what you share, and where you stop. A simple internal rule can change everything. Keep it true. Keep it kind. Say what's necessary and nothing more. That's what makes this approach so powerful. You're not managing the other person. You're managing yourself. You're choosing language with structure, with edges, with limits. And when you stop building conversational on-ramps, manipulators stop moving forward. This is what it looks like in real life. Someone tries to pull you into their drama by asking for advice, but you can tell they don't want advice. They want validation or an ally. Instead of getting pulled in, you simply ask, "What do you think you should do?" It sounds curious, but it's a dead end. No judgment, no position, nothing to argue with. Or someone brings up a polarizing topic and clearly wants you to take a side. Instead of engaging, you say, "I try to stay neutral on that." You haven't agreed. You haven't disagreed. You haven't given them anything to push against. Or someone tries to drag you into conflict with a third party, a mutual friend, a family member. You don't take the bait. You say, "That sounds like something you should talk to them about." It quietly refuses triangulation and closes the door on being used as a middleman. These aren't magic phrases. They're examples of a pattern. And this isn't about one perfect conversation. It's about every interaction, especially with people you're close to, even with people who aren't manipulators. And when you first start doing this, it's hard, especially in relationships where you've never had boundaries before, where you've always explained, softened, accommodated, or kept the peace. Shifting in those moments doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're learning. At first, it takes real mental and emotional effort. You'll want it to feel smooth and graceful right away. You'll think that if you just say it the right way once, it should be done. That expectation leads to frustration. This is a long game. Holding your shape in conversation takes focus and stamina, especially when someone is testing your limits. You're becoming someone who doesn't absorb pressure just to keep things comfortable. And you will get it wrong sometimes. You'll say too much. You'll add an on-ramp. You'll soften something that didn't need softening. You'll walk away wishing you'd handled it differently. That's normal. But every time you choose clarity over comfort, it gets easier. The more you commit to saying only what's true, kind, and necessary, the more natural it becomes. And eventually, something shifts. The manipulators fade away. Not because they've changed, but because you have. You've made yourself unexploitable. When manipulation shows up in conversation, it rarely announces itself. It doesn't say, "I'm about to pressure you." It slips in quietly, disguised as concern, curiosity, disappointment, or confusion. That's why the moment you feel emotionally activated is the moment you're most at risk. Your body reacts before your mind catches up. You feel that familiar pull to explain, to soften, to make things easier. That pull is the signal. The unmanipulatable method works because it slows that moment down. The first step is learning to recognize which emotional trigger is being pressed. Is this about guilt? The subtle suggestion that you're hurting someone or letting them down? Is it fear? The implication that something bad will happen if you don't comply? Is it disapproval? The sense that you're being judged or might lose approval if you don't respond the right way? Or is it control? The discomfort of not knowing how the situation will unfold unless you step in and manage it. Once you can name the trigger, it loses some of its power. You're no longer reacting blindly. You're observing. And observation creates space. The second step is checking in with yourself before you speak. This is where most people skip ahead, because it feels awkward at first. You ask yourself simple but grounding questions. What do I actually think about this? What do I want to say? What don't I want to say? Where do I want this conversation to stop? This step reconnects you with your internal authority. Your words stop coming from pressure and start coming from intention. You're no longer speaking to manage their feelings or steer their reaction. You're speaking to stay aligned with yourself. The third step is protecting that truth by how you deliver it. This is where the dead end comes in. You speak calmly, simply, and with finality. You don't over-explain. You don't defend. You don't cushion the message to make it easier for them to accept. You let the line stand on its own. For many people, this is the hardest part. Not because it's aggressive, but because it feels stark. It can feel cold when you're used to padding everything with reassurance. But clarity isn't cruelty. It's just unfamiliar. If you're not sure where to start, there's a practical exercise that helps. Write out the sentence exactly how you're tempted to say it, with all the softeners included. The apologies, the justifications, the "I hope that's okay" at the end. Then go back and remove every phrase that opens the door again. What's left will feel uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is the sound of you holding your shape. As you practice this, you'll start to notice how your body reacts. When you're over-giving or cushioning your truth, there's often a subtle feeling of tension, resentment, or regret afterward. When you speak from clarity, there's a different feeling. It's quieter, more grounded. Even if the other person doesn't like it, you'll feel intact. And that's the real shift. You stop measuring success by whether the other person is happy, calm, or satisfied. You measure success by whether you stayed aligned with yourself. This is why reasonable people respond differently than manipulators. Reasonable people may not love your boundary, but they'll respect it. They'll adjust. They'll move on. Manipulators, on the other hand, are repelled by clarity. They push harder, test more aggressively, or eventually disengage altogether. Not because you argued better, but because there's nothing left for them to work with. Over time, this changes your entire social landscape. You stop attracting people who rely on pressure, guilt, or emotional leverage. Not intentionally, but because those tactics no longer work on you. You become someone who doesn't absorb other people's chaos. Someone who doesn't give away power just to keep interactions smooth. It's important to be honest about this part. Learning to be unmanipulatable doesn't make conversations easier right away. In fact, at first, it can make them feel harder, especially in relationships where you've historically been the accommodating one, the peacemaker, the explainer. When you shift, the dynamic shifts, and not everyone will like that. You might be met with confusion, pushback, accusations that you've changed. And in a way, you have. You're no longer prioritizing emotional comfort over self-respect. That takes strength. And it takes repetition. You'll still stumble. You'll still catch yourself after the fact thinking, I should have stopped sooner, or I didn't need to explain all that. That's not failure. That's awareness. And awareness is progress. The more you practice, the faster you recover. The faster you recognize the trigger. The faster you return to yourself. And eventually, you'll notice something subtle but powerful. Conversations that used to drain you no longer do. The mental replay afterward fades. You don't lie awake wishing you'd said something differently, because you already said what needed to be said. And when a new manipulative personality enters your life, you'll feel it immediately. The pressure, the framing, the subtle push. But instead of being pulled in, you'll pause. You'll recognize the pattern, and you'll respond with clarity. They won't get close enough to do damage. This isn't about becoming detached or unemotional. It's about becoming sovereign in your own voice. You're still kind, still thoughtful, still empathetic. But your empathy now has structure. It has limits. And that's what keeps it from being exploited. So when you're faced with manipulation in conversation, remember the method. Notice the trigger. Reconnect with your truth. Protect it with a calm, final response. No extra doors. No emotional negotiations. You're not here to manage other people's reactions. You're here to manage your own integrity. And that's what makes you unmanipulatable. In conclusion, becoming unmanipulatable isn't about learning clever phrases or psychological tricks. It's about changing your relationship with your own words. When you stop over-explaining, stop softening out of fear, and stop offering access where none is deserved, you reclaim your power one conversation at a time. Boundaries stop being something you defend and start being something you embody. Over time, clarity becomes your default, and manipulation simply has nowhere to land. If this resonated with you and you want to go deeper, the next video on your screen breaks down how to spot narcissistic tactics early, avoid their most common conversational traps, and build boundaries that actually hold under pressure. Don't skip it. It's a powerful next step in protecting your energy and creating the life you deserve. Go ahead and click it now. I'll see you there.